From houses on self-raising stilts to floating escape pods, there are lots of insane ways to protect yourself from flooding. So let's grab our waders and head into the storm as we check out some ingenious anti-flood inventions that perform the impossible. Modern Moses. You can't talk about floods without mentioning Venice, the Italian city that was built on the water. Venice sits on wooden stilts in the Venetian lagoon, a partially enclosed bay that's connected to the Adriatic Sea with 3 inlets. The lagoon has fluctuating tides, and most winters the city goes through a period called acqua alta, where high tides cause widespread flooding. This usually lasts for just a couple of hours, and historically Venetians have dealt with it by building temporary boardwalks above the water level so they can go about their lives. However, rising sea levels caused by climate change have made Acqua Alta far worse, resulting in deeper and longer-lasting floods that cause severe damage. Since 1872, there have been 324 floods in Venice that have been classed as very intense events, where the water level has increased by around 4.5 feet. But 187 of them have occurred in the last 30 years. So as water levels continue to rise, the city really is at risk of sinking beneath the waves. Which is why in 2003, Venice's government started to build MOSE. This giant anti-flood system sits in Venice's 3 inlets, and it's designed to hold back the sea during high tide and stop the city from flooding. The barriers normally sit flat on the seabed, and their hollow bodies are filled with water to weigh them down. But when there's a flood warning, compressed air is pumped into them through underground tunnels. This pushes the water out, which allows the barriers to float to the surface and reach their full height of 95 feet to block more water from entering the lagoon. Each barrier is 65 feet wide, which is roughly the length of a bowling lane. But the lagoon's largest inlet stretches up to 1,365 feet, and blocking all 3 of them required 78 barriers. In total, MOSE took $8 billion and 17 years to build, and it had its first successful test in October 2020 as it was deployed to stop an Acqua Alta. MOSE worked. However, the system needs a full 48 hours notice to be activated. So when an unexpected flash flood hit Venice in December 2020, it was too late to deploy the multi-billion-dollar system, and the city was severely flooded. This shows that while the expensive barriers can work, they aren't particularly efficient, and most Venetians agree that MOSE is a temporary solution that'll only last a few decades as the sea level continues to rise. Still, it's hugely impressive, and even if it isn't a permanent answer to Venice's flooding problem, hopefully it'll buy them enough time to find one. We really don't want Venice to end up sleeping with the fishes. Flee the flood. In case of light flooding, you can handle the situation by jumping in a boat or strapping some plastic stools to your feet and going about your business. But these methods won't stand up against the most devastating floods, like the kind caused by tsunamis. These giant waves are caused by earthquakes and other underwater explosions, and they've been recorded to reach up to 1,720 feet tall. They're powerful enough to tear up trees, pull buildings from their foundations, and cause catastrophic flooding. So no flood barrier is tall or strong enough to fully stop these natural disasters. As a result, several companies have started developing tsunami escape pods that allow you to float away from the giant waves instead. The NOAA Disaster Shelter is a reinforced, buoyant sphere developed by the Japanese company New Cosmo Power. Their pod is made of strong fiberglass to withstand hits from debris floating in the water, and inside it has space for 4 people. It's just 4 feet in diameter, so it's pretty cramped, but at $3,900 the Invention is very affordable, and I think that's a reasonable price to avoid being flattened by the ocean. However, if you're prepared to shell out a bit more for your anti-tsunami shell, the survival capsule is an alternative model that's far more comfortable. The $15,000 pod was invented in Seattle, and it has comfy seats with seatbelts, a reinforced aluminum frame, and the same insulation that NASA used on the space shuttle. The pod will always stay upright thanks to 20-pint water bladders on the bottom that keep it afloat, and it also comes with surround sound speakers and a toilet. Man, that survival pod sounds cozier than my apartment. The capsule has also been tested in extreme conditions. The designers have subjected its water-sealed door to 40,000 pounds of pressure to ensure it won't buckle or leak, and they even pushed it over a waterfall in 2020. The invention has come under some criticism from experts, as if it gets stuck beneath underwater debris, it's unlikely that a rescue team would be able to open the pod and free the occupant. So in the event of a tsunami, getting to high ground by climbing a hill or tall building is always the best course of action. But if you're elderly or disabled, you might not be able to flee the flood, and in these cases, hopping in the capsule is a great way to increase your chances of survival. Then, once the tsunami subsides, its built-in GPS locator will allow rescuers to find you while you get comfy and listen to your favorite tunes. No, don't rescue me yet. Just 5 more minutes. Tokyo's tunnels. A flooded house is a terrible personal tragedy, but when an entire city floods, the consequences are even more devastating. So some cities have put serious effort into their flood defenses, and one of the largest in the world sits underneath the streets of Tokyo, Japan. This vast underground tunnel network is the Metropolitan Area Outer Underground Discharge Channel, or the GCANS project for short. When heavy rainfall or typhoons cause Tokyo's rivers to overflow, channels in their banks divert the surging waters through inlets that lead to the GCAN's 5 underground water tanks that are 230 feet deep and 100 feet wide. This water then runs through passages to reach a 580-foot long, 59-foot high chamber called the Discharge Tunnel. This cavernous space contains 4 gigantic jet engines that pump the water down the tunnel and into an outlet that leads to Edogawa River. The engines can pump 200 tons of water through the tunnel per second, which means they're powerful enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool in just over 4 seconds. The system was built between 1993 and 2006 and cost nearly $3 billion. But since then, Tokyo's surface is kept dry during floods as all the water is seamlessly pumped underground. Tokyo are pretty proud of their system, and incredibly, when the tunnels aren't in use, the public are allowed inside for guided tours. That's pretty awesome. But I just hope there isn't a flash flood while you're walking around in there. I definitely wouldn't want to see how GCANs work up close. The Glory Hole. Every engineer and beaver knows that if you want to hold back a huge amount of water, you should build a dam. But even these giant water-stopping walls have their limits, and when the water levels get so high that it threatens to overflow, the only thing preventing a complete disaster is the dam's spillway. These flood-preventing systems let excess water drain safely away from the dam when it reaches a certain height, like the overflow hole in a sink. They come in all shapes and sizes, from waterslide-style chutes to enormous gates in the dam itself, but one of the most interesting examples in the world is found at the Monticello Dam in Lake Berryessa, California, and it's affectionately known as the Glory Hole. But how does this big water hole work? Well, usually the water level at Lake Berryessa sits below the Glory Hole at around 430 feet, and the spillway's 72-foot wide opening dries out in the sun. But when heavy rainfall causes the water to rise above 439.96 feet, the Glory Hole acts like a giant plug hole, taking in the excess water and sending it down a 200-foot-long pipe to the nearby Puta Creek. Since the Glory Hole was built in 1957, it's been used 27 times. This might not seem like a lot, but if a dam overflows, it can cause catastrophic flooding. And if the Monticello Dam ever breached, it's estimated that the nearby city of Winters would be under 40 feet of water in around 15 minutes. So the 27 times that the spillway's been used has potentially saved thousands of lives, and I think we should all be grateful that glory holes exist. High and dry. You know the phrase, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em? Well, sometimes that applies to floods too, and if you can't hold back the rush of incoming floodwater, it can be better to go with the flow. The Buoyant Foundation is an organization that builds floating houses for impoverished communities that regularly deal with flooding. For example, they worked with a village on the banks of Nicaragua's Malacatoya River to build Casa Amphibia, a custom bamboo cabin that sits on top of large, buoyant plastic barrels. When heavy rainfall causes the river to flood, the barrels will let the hut float on top of the water, and guidance posts are fitted and fixed to the ground to ensure the houses don't drift from their original position while they surf. Gnarly dudes. The buoyant foundation uses recycled materials, so their huts are extremely cost-effective. But they aren't the only people who've decided to rise above floodwater. In 2013, Baca architects took this idea to another level. Quite literally. They were tasked with building a house on a plot of land on an island in the middle of England's River Thames, which floods almost every year. Nearby houses are raised off the ground on stilts, which is the easiest, cheapest, and most common way to prevent a house from flooding. However, local planning laws prevent buildings from being built too high for aesthetic reasons, and in order to get the desired amount of indoor space whilst obtaining planning permission, the solution was to create an amphibious house. Basically, they built a watertight concrete box on the base of the house which sits within a container that is allowed to flood. When the river level rises, it fills inside the container, and then, like a bucket floating in a bathtub, the main house rises. The whole house is guided by mechanisms called dolphins, which keep the structure level as it rises. At the bottom of the structure is the basement, which provides for additional living space that wouldn't be possible to achieve given local planning laws. When the area floods, the house, which I'm naming Bob, simply floats above it. Utilities and service pipes can extend by up to 3 meters, so the owners can live in the house during the flood as normal. While that is cool, another British company called Larkfleet Group has developed a more high-tech version of the concept. In the event of a flood, Larkfleet's elevating house will raise itself up by 5 feet on a set of stilts in just 5 minutes. The house is jacked up using an electric motor driving mechanical jacks. To reduce the risk of this failing to work, the house is meant to be jacked up well ahead of arriving floodwaters based on advanced warnings from organizations such as the Environment Agency, which can usually predict floods at least a week ahead of time. You can lift the house with a flick of a switch to keep your possessions dry, and the home uses flexible gas, water, and sewage pipes to stay connected to public utilities while it's raised. Still, the homeowners aren't supposed to stay inside the lifted home, and they're actually meant to move into temporary accommodations until the floodwaters recede and the house is lowered. That's pretty disappointing, and if I owned the elevating house, I'd definitely use it to live in a permanent treehouse and lord over my stupid neighbor Greg. Unfortunately, this fantasy will have to wait because while Larkfleet Group built a test model of the elevating house in 2018, the product still isn't available to the public. Whatever, Greg. I'll get you one day. Danube denied. In 1991, torrential rainfall caused the Danube River to rapidly rise and break its banks, resulting in devastating floods in Austria and Germany. Over 100 people lost their lives, and it was considered a once-in-a-century disaster. But in 2002, more heavy rain caused another flood from the Danube that inflicted $26 billion of damages in Austria, Germany, and the Czech Republic. After the flood subsided, each country decided enough was enough and built a system of flood walls along the banks of their rivers to prevent future disasters. Austria's version was the Mauchline Dam, a 22-mile-long flood wall along the Danube from Mauthausen to St. Nicola. The majority of the system consists of walls made out of dirt, but the most impressive section was built in the town of Grine, which sits right next to the Danube. At a glance, it just looks like a regular wall, but the whole thing sits on top of an underground barrier that prevents floodwater from seeping into the ground and traveling underneath the defenses. Then up on the surface, the barrier consists of a permanent 3-foot-tall concrete base and a set of removable metal planks that are suspended between metal posts. The posts and planks can be installed or removed incredibly quickly, allowing engineers to rapidly build the barrier up in the event of flash flooding to a maximum height of 12 feet. The walls were completed in 2012, which was just in time because in June 2013 there was yet another massive flood which caused the Danube to burst its banks. The floodwater peaked 2 inches below the top of the extended wall, so it would have destroyed the town. But thanks to the barrier, the Danube was denied and Grind was completely undamaged. Damn, I bet they wish they'd built this dam years ago. Hold back the river. In areas where flooding is rare, town locals needed to deploy temporary flood walls to protect them, like these geodesign barriers. The barriers are composed of interlocking metal panels covered with a sturdy tarpaulin membrane, and they come in multiple sizes. The elemental model is the smallest at 2 feet tall, and they're light enough to be set up by a single person. But they're relatively small and made of thin steel sheets, so for bigger floods you'd need Geodesign's heavy-duty model. These have much stronger frames made from galvanized steel that can handle impacts from strong currents and debris. But they stand up to 8 feet tall, so they need a whole group of people to set them up, and in 2018 the system was put to the test. The Intercoastal Waterway is a 3,000-mile-long network of rivers and canals that stretches along America's east coast, and in 2018 torrential rain caused by Hurricane Florence caused it to overflow in South Carolina. 3 homeowners in Myrtle Beach called Geodesign for help, and the company sent out a team to set up their heavy-duty barriers around the homes. The barriers locked together to encircle each house, and when the flood rolled in, they successfully held it back, saving the families more than $100,000 in damages. That's pretty impressive, but the barriers have also been used to protect entire towns. In February 2022, the River Severn in Britain was predicted to flood, so geodesign barriers were installed on its banks through the English town of Ironbridge. The barriers lined the sidewalk to contain the river, and they successfully protected homes, cafes, and pubs as it flooded. This allowed the Brits to drink their pints in peace, while proving that unlike the Pokemon, these Geodudes definitely aren't weak against water. Home defense. Gates are typically designed to protect your home from intruders, but today you can fit your house with one that'll keep floodwater out too. This device is the right holler hinged bulkhead, a gate that automatically raises into a barrier during a flood. The bulkhead usually lies flat on the ground, but if it floods, the water flows through a grate in front of it into a water tank. When this tank fills to a certain level, it activates a gas pressure cylinder that closes the barrier, automatically protecting your house without using any electricity. When the water level falls, the tank empties into the sewers and a crank is used to lower the barrier, returning your bone-dry driveway to its original state. The Agir self-closing flood barrier is a similar device that's even simpler, because it doesn't require the gas cylinder. The device features a barrier stored underground and a grate at ground level. During a flood, the grates take in the floodwater and sends it into a hollow compartment underneath the barrier. As the water level in the compartment increases, the pressure pushes the barrier upwards where it's ready to stand against the encroaching flood. It's been successfully tested against simulations of incredibly strong storms, and it can be placed anywhere that's at risk of flooding, whether that's an underground parking lot or a riverbank. In fact, it's currently used to protect the National Archives in Washington, D.C., where they store records from Congress and the Supreme Court. This version is 26 feet tall when fully raised to ensure these important documents don't get water damaged. And it's just as well the Invention is fully automatic. You definitely couldn't trust politicians to remember to turn these barriers on when they're needed. A brilliant bag. When all your flood defenses fail and water starts pouring into your home, you need a last-ditch solution to protect your belongings. The Climate Guard Temporary Protective Enclosure is essentially a giant anti-flood bag that's made of military-grade polyethylene plastic. Now, stuffing your valuables into a waterproof bag might seem quite basic, but the enclosure can resist up to 3 feet of standing water and keep your possessions dry for the duration of a flood. Furthermore, the polyethylene material is incredibly buoyant, so as the flood rolls in, the bag will float on top of it, keeping your belongings away from debris floating under the surface. The Climate Guard isn't only made for family photos, and the bag is so large and sturdy that you can actually drive your car into it and save it from the flood. This will keep your car dry, and the bag is buoyant enough to make your vehicle float above the floodwater and underwater debris too. The Climate Guard's inventor, Rahel Abraham, actually came up with the idea after her car was flooded during Hurricane Harvey in 2017. She started developing it to save other vehicles from the same fate, and today the device has been perfected, and you can buy one yourself for $400. That might seem expensive, but it's nothing compared to the cost of replacing a car. So if you live in an area prone to flooding, it's probably worth it. The door stop. The simplest solutions are often the best, and if you want to stop water from entering your home, the first step should be to block your front door. The Damn Easy Flood Barrier offers the easiest way to do this, as the watertight gate allows anybody to make any doorway completely flood-proof. The gate has extendable sides, so you can increase its size to block doorways between 31 inches and 43 inches wide. Then once it's in place, you use a built-in air pump to inflate a rubber tube around the outside of the barrier, creating a watertight seal that will lock it in the doorway. If you need to block a larger entryway, you can place several barriers side by side and use the pump to seal them together, letting you protect your garage as well as your front door. It only takes 5 minutes to set up and doesn't need any specialized tools, so the device couldn't be simpler. However, it's also incredibly strong, and its designers have rigorously stress tested it to prove that it will hold up against any stormy weather and large pieces of debris. Each barrier costs $900, which is a good deal if you're just blocking off your door. But it'd take around 5 barriers to seal off my garage, and personally, I'd rather save the $4,500 and let the flood take the cobwebs, rusty lawn equipment, and rats that I store in there. The Watergate. Let's move on to Watergate, a political scandal that brought Richard Nixon's presidency to an end in the 1970s. Wait, no, this is the wrong video. Let's move on to the Watergate Dam, an innovative flood defense from a company called Megasecure. This barrier is essentially a giant canvas bag that you drop in the path of an incoming flood. Then the floodwater flows into an opening and fills the bag up, causing it to expand and block any more water that flows in that direction. 2 people can deploy a Watergate around an entire house in 5 minutes, so the temporary barrier is the perfect way to protect a building in case of unexpected flooding. Furthermore, they're made of flexible PVC plastic, so you can put them on any surface no matter how uneven it is. In 2013, heavy rains in Quebec caused a lake called the Lac Truit to overflow and flood the surrounding area. So one local homeowner contacted Megasecure and asked if they could save their house. Megasecure sent out a team who used a giant Watergate to encircle the home, and as the water came rushing in, it created a barrier that kept the house bone dry until the water subsided. The biggest version of the dam is 5 feet high, but it'll set you back nearly $20,000, which might be outside your budget. So when the Mississippi River flooded in 2011, one homeowner who didn't want to splash out for a Watergate came up with a DIY solution instead. He bought 23 truckloads of sand and used that to build a 5-foot-tall barrier around his house. It saved his home when his neighbors got flooded, and after the waters receded, his barrier was still standing. Still, I bet it was a real pain to remove all that sand, so if my house is ever at risk of flooding, I think I'll go with Watergate Dam instead. Anyway, here's Waterwall. During a flood, it's easy for sewers to get overwhelmed by the amount of water flowing into them through the storm drains. So sometimes instead of blocking floodwater and letting it build up into pools, we need to divert it and send it along predictable channels to make the crisis easier to manage. NOAQ box walls are plastic flood barriers that link together to control and redirect everything from a small flow of water to a massive flash flood. You can connect as many box walls as you need by quickly clipping them together by hand. Then once you've deployed your wall, the floodwater will go where you command, so you can steer it away from an already overflowing storm drain or towards your stupid neighbor's house. Gotcha, Greg! Now, the plastic walls are pretty light, so you might think they'd wash away during intense floods. However, their L-shaped design means that the weight of the water pushes the barrier's base towards the ground, and this pressure holds the entire thing in place. The more floodwater, the more pressure pushing down on the barrier, meaning it'll actually be more secure during heavier flooding. The modules aren't meant to be deployed permanently, but they can be used repeatedly whenever a flood rolls into town, and NOAQ say they should last for around 20 years. That being said, each box wall does cost $382, and you'll need lots of them to fight off a large flood. So if you want to build a big enough wall to steer floodwater away from your house, it might cost more than the valuables you're protecting. Sandless bags. We've used sandbags to fight floods since the 18th century because they're simple, cheap, and make a strong seal against the ground. But a company called QuickDam is trying to bring the concept into the 21st century and improve it with the invention of their sandless sandbags. These bags might look underwhelming, but don't worry, they're growers, not showers. Instead of sand, they contain a highly absorbent powder that swells up when it comes into contact with water. Each bag starts out weighing just 2.6 pounds, but after 10 minutes of exposure to water, it absorbs 3.3 gallons and swells to a massive 32 pounds. There's also a jumbo version, which is 4 feet long and weighs 35 pounds when dry, before absorbing a whopping 8 gallons of water. The powder they contain is much lighter than sand, so you could replace your normal sandbags with the same number of QuickDam bags, and they'd weigh way less. In fact, one pallet of 880 jumbo sandless bags weighing under 4 tons can do the same work as 71 pallets of regular sandbags, weighing 46 tons. This makes your defenses far quicker to set up as it requires a single person instead of a whole team of workers. So the sandless bags might look like weaklings when you open the package, but put these bags in some water and they'll transform into sandless sumo wrestlers before your very eyes. Good luck getting anything past these guys. Shut the front door. Lots of these flood defenses don't really go with the aesthetic of my bachelor pad, and I could do with something more inconspicuous than a pile of sandbags or a heavy metal gate. Fortunately, I can guard my home with the Stormmeister flood door, an invention that's designed to block floods in style. Despite looking like a regular front door, the Stormmeister has a hollow chamber around its edge that's made of stretchy rubber. During a flood, the chamber fills with water and expands, forming a watertight seal between the door and the frame. This seal is able to withstand up to 3 feet of water, so it'll keep you safe even if the flood's water level reaches your ground floor windows. One of these doors will cost you between $2,000 and $3,000, which isn't cheap. But they'll protect your home from floods and judgmental neighbors who will have no idea how much you've splashed out on keeping splashes out. Well, I'm soaked, but at least my house made it through the storm in one piece. Which of these incredible anti-flood inventions was your favorite? Let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.